All righty. We are live and in living color. Y'all know what it is. This is the writers panel, and what I always say is, where two or more are gathered in the name of funktivity, funky things will happen. And we got the right folks with whom to get funky. This panel is comprised of folks who publish regularly in various genres, including on the artistry of Prince, and they will be discussing the wonderful collection of essays that is included in the Diamonds and Pearls SDE. We're going to do a quick introduction of each one of these, and then we're going to get to the questions. Our first panelist is Professor Kamilah Cummings. She is a writer, editor, and visiting senior lecturer at DePaul University in Chicago, who has published multiple articles on Prince in various peer-reviewed journals. Next is Brother Scott Woods. He is the author or editor of two poetry collections, Urban Contemporary History Month, and also We Over Here Now, and a collection of essays on Prince titled Prince and Little Weird Black Boy Gods. Third is our good brother Zachary Hoskins, who is the author of Dance, Music, Sexual Man's, a song-by-song blog examining the music of Prince in chronological order. His essay, Rude Boy, Prince as a Black New Waver, was published in a special issue of Spectrum, a journal on Black men. And finally, the man who coined the band with no name, Brother Harold Pride, is an independent Black music scholar, community-based lecturer, and arts enthusiast. In addition to various podcast appearances, he's presented at Spelman College as part of the Posing Beauty exhibit and the Black Albums Matter series at Cal State University, among others. And now what we're going to do, folks, there are several essays. And so our panelists know that we're going to be discussing each one of these essays in order. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give them first the general question about all of the essays, and then I'm going to go one by one to each essay that's in the collection. So first and foremost, folks, I want you just to give me your overall views. Choose one or several essays to discuss the writer's use of language in constructing a well-crafted testament and monument to Prince and Diamonds and Pearls. Whether it's the use of quotes, personal testament, analysis, or all three, highlight a few of the effective moments of writing in this collection. And so we'll start with Brother Pride and go around.
I was afraid you were going to call me first, but it's all good. Hey, everybody. I have to start with Kamilah Williams. I am so proud of her, and I learned so much from her by being in community with her, as well as each of you. But very specifically, her essay and it highlighting her entry point to Prince studies and just an awareness, a heightened awareness of his artistry. It kind of sets the stage for conversation around this project being an entry point for so many people, right? And we talk, there can be, in more truncated conversations, there could be so much talk about wanting interest and people leaving. But a lot of things began with this project as well. And I'm really happy that she gave language to that in her essay and talking about the origins and how she came to hear Cream, et cetera, as well as her just being present as a part of the actual set. It says a lot that someone like her, as well as D'Angela and Andrea Swinson, who I'll give her flowers a little later, being a part of this set. It says a lot that these are the voices that have been chosen to be a part of a project that is so pivotal. This album, like every Prince album, it's important, right? It's not up to his fans to determine which of his previously released work has merit. He determined it. You didn't, right? So I'm really happy. I'm really happy that these voices, these band members, everyone has been given the opportunity to have their experiences be given air. And Kamilah is just such a spot-on choice. So yeah, that's probably the one that stands out amongst several others that are great as well.
Okay, cool. Now we're gonna go to brother Zachary Hoskins. Brother Hoskins, same question.
So I'm gonna go a little bit rogue and kind of flip this question a little bit, because for me, what I was really struck by when I was reading through these essays was not so much the use of language as the, similar to what Harold's talking about, the curation of the voices that we're hearing. And it really struck me how true to Prince these choices are. One thing that, if you look at Prince's, how he did his own work, he so frequently went to people that you wouldn't expect, people who in a lot of cases didn't feel like they were ready to be in the position that they were. And I just thought it was so interesting and so cool. I mean, you have Chuck D. He's kind of taking the position of like the Duff McKagan from the 1999 set. This is like the person, the famous person that's good that you can put on the box and it says commentary from Chuck D. And you have Jason Draper, published author. Dwayne Tudall, I think, has kind of become like the sessionographer. He's, the Mark Lewison, what Mark Lewison is to the Beatles, Dwayne Tudall is to Prince. But D'Angela and Kamilah, I can't think of another artist where those voices would be spotlighted. And I mean this, I know it sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I mean this. I think this is so true to Prince's spirit, because when I have seen essays from the, rock literati about Prince, I have never been impressed by them, and a lot of folks have weighed in since he died. I remember a couple of years ago, there was an essay from an English writer named Ian Penman going around. And I was seeing it. That was back when I was on Twitter, and I was seeing people share it, and I read it, and I just found it banal and facile and saying a lot of the same shit that we've been hearing for 40 years. And it's like, this is a quote unquote respected voice, and it didn't tell me anything about Prince as somebody who, has spent a lot of time listening to and thinking about him. And so I'm so impressed. And I was thinking about this in the context also. I'm about to wrap up my response. I was thinking about this in the context of, I recently got another reissue from the past year, which is the Lou Reed Words and Music set. And that has an essay by Grail Marcus in it, and can you imagine like a Lou Reed set having an essay by a fan of, a fan of Lou Reed who was not around from the, who's not even of Lou Reed's generation. But I think that's a really important voice for Prince. And I think those are the voices that are going to keep his legacy alive. So I think it's just an incredibly smart move to give some spotlight to fans who have important things to say and are incredibly articulate, and maybe they're not Grail Marcus, but I think that they know more about Prince than Grail Marcus does.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to go to Professor Cummings. Come on, sister.
I'm going to come through, y'all. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I can't praise my sisters enough. I'm so just elated and honored to be, as Harold said, in community with Kamilah and D'Angela. And, my work is around bringing the sisters out of the shadows. And so to have their essays that to me are really the heartbeat of this collection, I think they are just so beautifully thoughtful in their invitation for us to join their Prince journey. So when Kamilah talks about her core memory of Prince and D'Angela talks about seeing an album cover, and taking us to the journey up to Diamonds and Pearls, but then also an overarching theme of what Prince has meant in their lives. And I just love them both, and we'll talk about them individually. One of the things he talked about, a quote from Kamilah, I love the idea of talking about when, she kind of entered, or connected with or met Prince, because we did enter his world. No, make no mistake about it. It was his world, and we were just happy and fortunate and blessed to get an invitation into this beautiful space. So I love that they encapsulate so many different pathways to Prince. There are these connectors that we can all really relate to, no matter who you are and how you came to Prince. So for me, they're definitely the heartbeat of the work. And to what Zach was saying, the personal essays, to me, I really, in this collection, I like the way the personal essays and the expository essays complement each other, with the JJ birthday sweater that should have been art supplies, that was hoisted at us in the name of the sign of the times. Super deluxe. Thank you to my sister for that beautiful comparison of what sign of the times was. I felt the essays were empty. Even I know they tapped Lenny Kravitz and Dave Chappelle as the celebrity voices, but they were empty to me. They were disappointing. And the other essays were so focused on giving us 50 Shades of Wendy, Lisa, and Susanna that it was difficult to find Prince through the weeds of that. So this was really beautiful in the way they complemented each other and encapsulated what this period, what this project was for Prince. So definitely D'Angela, Kamilah, and Chuck D also. I really appreciated the intimacy of these personal essays this time around.
Thank you so much. And finally, Brother Woods, bring us on home with this question.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be with this esteemed panel. I'm just going to start this off by saying that, and this is why D'Angela in part asked me to do this, is because she knows that I'm going to mention that I spent $400 on this box set. All right. So I want to make it clear that you spend that kind of money on something like this, not specifically for the music, not just for the music. Like if you do that just for the music, you got robbed. I don't care what the music is. You do that because it has things like this book in it. And of the box sets, which have all been at least good, if not great, this book is the most meaningful of them all. And it is specifically that because of the two people we've been talking about. And I don't think we do anybody else in that book a disservice by focusing, especially in this context and in this space, on D'Angela and on Kamilah's essays. It's not the first time they've had, a Black woman in a book, right? They had Daphne Brooks in Sign of the Times. So it's not a first, but, these are people, we keep saying, they're fans, which is true, but they're more than that, right? D'Angela makes things like this and does that like twice a year and has been doing that for years and if you look at the level of people who are involved in these, symposiums, conferences, celebration in this case, we're not talking about no scrubs, right? So, and we're all doing this out of love for Prince and for D'Angela. And so to see her get that shine in this context, putting her firmly in the canon of Prince that's a big deal. And Kamilah, same thing. Kamilah is on the front line all the time, stunting on fools, correcting people's histories, getting everybody's little trivia right, like hardcore. And so the fact that they're included in here it's not just a nod to fans, right? It's a nod to their work, and it adds them as voices of import to the canon.
There we go. All right. So what we're going to do now, guys, is we're going to go through each one of the essays. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask one question per essay. And then once we get to the end of the essays, depending on how much time we have, I'll go back and ask a second question from the essay. But what I'll probably do after that first round is stop to see if there's something specific that you guys want to discuss, the way I make sure that we get everybody's voices kind of involved here. And so the first essay, of course, we're going to deal with the first essay in the book, which is Chuck D's essay titled, He Taught Everyone You Can Never Make Too Much Music. So the question I'm giving you guys from Chuck D's essay is, why is it important to ensure that the world understands that Prince was one of the few artists who could enter into a studio alone and leave with an album? And they didn't get this part, I'm going to just put it out there. I'm going to just be messy and petty for a minute. Prince, Beyonce, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston. If you put all four of those people in the studio by themselves, no musicians, no engineers, ain't but one of those people leaving the studio with an album. I'll let y'all guess which one of those persons it is. So why is it important that Chuck D lets us know that Prince had this ability? I will start with Brother Pride and go around.
First of all, I want to, before I answer that, I want to say how gratified I am that Chuck D was selected to contribute. And the timeliness of his selection kind of juxtaposed against these kind of like waves of contempt around, supposed contempt around Prince's ideas with hip hop, right? And what he did and didn't want, and more often than not, the leaders of these conversations aren't necessarily people who are a part of the community that hip hop came from, but it's essentially posited as an observation. I love the fact that while these conversations are taking place on social media, Chuck D, it's, again, from a timeliness perspective, has written an essay to speak about that and speak about, in this particular case, the importance of us continuing to give witness to the idea that Prince was self-contained. By the time we get to 91, the novelty of the byline that was attached to Prince had kind of worn a little bit, right? As far as the produced performer, we'd gotten used to that after a decade or so. But having someone like Chuck D, who is, such a giant in an art form that did not, in the Black American art form that did not produce Prince, that in a community that Prince was not a part of, giving Prince credit and also kind of giving Prince his due credit as not just as an innovator, but a mad scientist. And the mad scientist Prince is not a Prince that we get to see often live. And I love being able to kind of identify points throughout his career where it's like, that's mad scientist Prince right there. He forgot he was on stage, right? Like, I love being able to pinpoint that, and having Chuck D give language to that is really, really valuable as a linchpin to begin like the commentary around Diamonds and Pearls and the contents in the book. So those are just like my initial thoughts as far as Chuck's involvement, and I'll probably chime in a little later.
Thank you, good sir. All right, next would be Brother Zach. Go ahead and tell us your thoughts about that.
Well, I mean, I'm going to be kind of echoing Harold again. I think it's important because it's easy, seemingly shockingly easy to take for granted. And I see this a lot. I see this a lot in the critical responses to Prince. What of Prince is held in esteem and the degree to which it's held in esteem compared to other artists. I've never said this, and because I'm aware of how like sour grapes it comes off, but I feel like the writers panel is probably the best, or maybe the worst place to say it. But I'm gonna go ahead and say it. My blog, which if you haven't read it, is going through Prince's music song by song, and you have plenty of time to catch up because I've been burned out this year and I have barely written at all. But my blog is heavily inspired by a similar blog that a guy named Chris O'Leary did about David Bowie, which is fantastic, by the way. I'm not firing shots at Chris O'Leary, but I have found it very interesting just how much his blog took off, and just how much of a phenomenon it became. And when I think about, I mean, and there's a lot that, like, I think he's probably a better writer than me, like, so I'm not saying like, why don't I have the success Chris O'Leary has had, but I just find it very interesting when I think about the artist that Prince was and the artist that Bowie was. I love David Bowie, but he wasn't a half the artist that Prince was. And I think there's something about Prince where he makes everything seem so effortless, and you almost take it for granted. And I think that's the story of Diamonds and Pearls. That's the story of Prince in the 90s, really. And I was just kind of looking through my book. There's a quote in there from Michael Bland where he says, I remember a friend of mine saying, why doesn't Prince get credit for something like Insatiable? That's like modern Duke Ellington. There's so much going on there. But when you're amazing all day, every day, people just expect it. And I think about that all the time with Prince, because I fall into that sometimes too. There's a long period where I didn't particularly rate Prince's 90s stuff, because it's sort of like, it's Prince being Prince. He could do that in his sleep. And it's like, yes, maybe Prince could do that in his sleep, but who else could? It's almost like he set the bar so high that it's almost unfair to try and expect him to put out a Sign of the Times every year. I mean, that's a generational, monumental achievement. The fact that he could even put out a Come every year is more than 90% of artists could ever dream of. So I just I think it's important to remember, because we forget, like there will not be someone of his like will not walk among us anytime in the near future. We'll be lucky to see another person like that in our lifetimes.
Appreciate you, sir. Brother Woods, come on in.
So the fact that Chuck D was invited to do this essay is profound. And I say that having low expectations for what Chuck D might have written before I read it. I was like, yeah, it's going to be like the Chappelle one. It's going to be like the Kravitz one, right? Like, yeah, I knew Prince, and we used to hang out and blah, 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 some Questlove stuff. And so I was just like, yeah, okay. But then, like, you have to, like, really contextualize Chuck. This is a dude who, by the time Diamonds and Pearls dropped, Public Enemy was putting out their fourth record. And they were the blackest thing in music, period. Like, they were already doing rap, it was like the blackest thing, and then they were the blackest rappers, right? Mm-hmm. And they had been the blackest rappers for like 4 straight years. And so the fact that, and that's how we perceive them, right? Like, after that kind of high period of the early 90s going almost to the mid 90s, we don't hold Public Enemy up to the same way, because rap changed, right? And they kind of stayed the course, right? And so the Chuck that writes this essay is not the same Chuck from that time, but but everybody understands the estate Chuck, everybody understands that is still the Chuck D we perceive, the blackest person on the planet, black person, And so it's really profound, at least on that level, that he has asked to introduce this entire affair, right? Like, look, you don't know this man the way you think you know this man. All you got is that music. And I'm telling you that he's deeper than even that music, right? The fact that he and I were in regular conversation, regular relationship, friendship. We had things going on back and forth. We are speaking to each other through music, for the record, right? Prince is referring to Chuck in music. Chuck is referring to Prince, right? And so it's really profound when you have these two seemingly disparate artists and a lot of people may not know that they were cool like that. But if you have these two seemingly disparate artists who are married at the hip, you know, as friends, as artists, as Black artists, it's a great way to intro the book, and it raises as many questions as it may answer, which is really the best thing that you could ask.
Very good. Thank you so much. Professor Cummings, come on, close us out on this.
Yeah, I just, again, Chuck D, to echo what everyone else has said, you know, you think of one of the most politically conscious Black rappers, and it's like, I got a super deluxe set from the estate the other day. I opened and read it now. But I think I love Black Steel and Hour Chaos will always be my favorite. So that's how I will forever see Chuck D. So to hear him talk about Prince in the way he did, even down to sharing that tidbit about the symbol chain that Prince gave him and traveling with it and having it with him. And I think about how much in certain spaces I have my Prince paraphernalia. I had my annual review on Thursday at work, and I was like, let me Prince up so I can get in here and let these people know what I'm worth. But, you know, just carrying a piece of Prince around with him, and even this later in life, lamenting that it was lost from airport security. It's those little intimate glimpses that say, yeah, this man meant something, you know, to this man as brothers, as musicians, as people who were politically conscious and invested in and in love with their Black community. So I loved having someone who's so respected open this up. I loved him giving Tony M his props as an MC. I thought about this set a lot in terms of quotes because they're really important and vital to the life force of these essays. And there were two quotes from Chuck D that stood out. One of them was where he said Prince definitely used rap as an instrument, because as we get into exploring the way Prince engages with rap and some of the negative feedback, I love the idea of it's an instrument, it's another instrument, like as he added strings or horns or different things, his music, an amazing voice like Rosie. And as that mad scientist, going back to that, the brilliance and creativity of Prince to decide, how am I going to integrate this music, this instrument into my sound, whether it's a Lin one or whatever it is, the Emax that was coming up a lot in the sessionography. How am I going to integrate and weave this into my own sound? So I love that musician's perspective from Chuck. I love when he said Prince was I wrote it down because I didn't want to butcher it. Prince was a fearless furnace of productivity, but I always thought the height of his imagination was yet to come. I thought that was beautiful, because so many people, even people who have positioned themselves as Prince scholars now, dismissed the 90s and said there wasn't anything good in the 90s. And the fact that you didn't keep up, or what he was doing didn't appeal to your taste, doesn't mean that there wasn't anything good. And I think a set like this really helps people to rediscover. I think in D'Angela's essay, she said Diamonds and Pearls was a treasure trove of discovery. And it is, and it's an opportunity for people to kind of step back and, to quote George Michael, listen without prejudice and really begin to understand who Prince was, that he could indeed walk into a studio. Because, and I was saying this to Harold, I think it was the other day, Harold, about how exquisite his vocals and piano are on Insatiable. And so what's clear in this box set is how he's using all these immensely talented musicians who were at his disposal, but still he could just walk into the studio and by himself and walk out with Insatiable. And you look at that, the picture of the board and what's on every track, and you're like, and this is just him. You know, it's the upright bass through the Emax. I love how he identifies his vocals as distant harmony for one backup vocal, and the other one he calls sexy sister. You know, so it's like this, he is this mad scientist, and he's like, oh, something cream. I can't remember what he said. It was on the one, ethereal cream, I think, or something like that on one track. And I'm just like, 2 tracks for piano. And it's like, yeah, this is all him. And so to diminish that and dismiss it based on your own limitations, again, Prince was a victim of 2 things. Racism, obviously. So to what Zach said, it's easy to kind of overlook somebody when they're amazing every day, but when you're Black and amazing every day, there's more incentive for people to overlook you and then intentionally try to erase you from your own legacy. And so that's why Chuck D's words are so important to me, because we know since 2016, and in some part with the last Deluxe set, the Sign of the Times, there's been an attempt to green book Prince, put him in the back seat of his own story, or, it's like Bob Marley, like you look and it's like, where's the Pan-Africanism? And a lot of the work about Bob Marley, his Pan-Africanist ideology has pretty much been wiped clean. And so it's very important to have these people and these musicians in particular reestablishing or reminding people of the fact that, as the great D'Angelo Duff said, Prince didn't need nobody, because he didn't. So it's very important to have someone who's as respected as Chuck D to just put the stamp on that.
Thank y'all so much. Now I'm gonna reverse the order with this next question. This question is coming from Andrea Swinson's essay in the book. And by the way, if you don't have Andrea Swinson's book, Got to Be Something in the Water, if you don't have that book, you should just choke yourself. Let's move on. So with that said, this is coming from Sister Swinson's essay. If it ain't from Minneapolis, it ain't shit. And so the question I want you guys to respond to from her essay is, if the new power generation was a symbol to help Prince, quote, deliver a bolder, reimagined version of himself, end quote, what exactly was that new version aesthetic of himself being presented in Diamonds and Pearls? And so I'm gonna come from backwards, so I'll start with Professor Cummings and go the opposite way. So Professor Cummings, putting you on the spot, and then we'll go in reverse order.
All right, y'all might need to do a cleanup on our Kamilah. I wasn't ready, sweet. No. You know what? There's so much in this essay, but in terms of this reimagining of Prince and this new aesthetic, I really, for me, and I love hearing all of these different perspectives on Diamonds and Pearls, because I loved it when it came out. I was a junior in high school, and so much of it spoke to me in terms of self-definition. My father used to always quote Thomas Szasz, the Hungarian psychiatrist, who said, define or be defined. And he'd always say, you define who you are. You don't let anybody else define you. And so thinking back, Liegh, to your presentation that we did on the PopCon conference, where you talked about Gene Toomer and Kane and Richard Wright and Black Boy, and this space for Black people like Prince who are fighting against, both sides of, as your quote that I still use every day almost, the toilet bowl of the white imagination, as Black people have been constructed in that space, but then also the Black people who have accepted and placed limitations on themselves and others based on that, toilet bowl script being the character that we're always playing. And so for me, when I think about Prince, Prince was someone who, it's really interesting. There's this aspect of Prince that this type of work allows us to see just how ethereal he was. He just feels otherworldly in ways. But then in true Gemini, to my Gemini people, in true Gemini fashion, the other side of him is so rooted in earthly things. He's so aware of the systems of oppression and the mechanisms and how to both exploit and rail against them at the same time. And so when we get to Diamonds and Pearls, in my previous presentation on this, I touched on this, Prince is so aware of the system. He's so aware of this Black and white system, that where there are different goalposts that keep moving for Black artists compared to white artists. And he played the game and exploited them. But as Andrea Swinson does an excellent job of doing, for the most part, except there was a misfire with Carrie, but I'll get to that later. But for the most part, what she does is an excellent job of rooting this work in roots, going back to Prince's roots. And so I don't think this is as much of a reimagining as it is a revealing, because Prince was always revealing layers of himself to us. He was always so far ahead of the game with his vision and where he was going. So for me, it's like, I'm going to reveal some more of me to you. I presented one version of myself to you. And as his trajectory throughout the rest of his career, he's peeling back more layers to the core. He gave us seedlings and little tidbits along the way in interviews, really from the very beginning, back to that 1980 or 81 interview where he said he was going to give people what they needed. And he wanted to get to a point where he had the audience he deserved and where they could tackle deeper issues and other things. And so this is that space where he's crossing over into that, where, because he's, I think of a song like Willing and Able, and he's really forecasting what's about to happen with the Symbol album and with the name change and all of that. He's really getting closer and closer to who he is. So for me, it's less of a reimagination and more of a reveal.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much. Brother Woods.
So, this, well, first of all, I have to second your recommendation of Andrea's book. That book is amazing. And while it is not only about Prince or really even greatly about Prince, it is completely the foundation of, it's the context. If you want to know how Prince happened, it happened in Black neighborhoods with Black musicians completely surrounding him at a time, and this is important to the essay that she put in this, at a time when Black musicians had to be able to do everything, right? They couldn't just play R&B. They couldn't just play soul. They also had to play rock. They also had to have a couple classical riffs, this kind of thing. And so, all great funk bands are like that. They can do anything. And this essay, which is primarily about how the New Power generation was formed, really kind of exposes that reality, right? She's not as explicit in this essay as she is in her book, right? Like, Prince is Black, comes from Black, is Black, gonna be Black, right? That's basically the book. And so is this essay. It just isn't as explicit. In this essay, the cool thing about this essay that's different than the book is that we get to hear from the Black people that he hired, right? All of the Black people the dancers, right? Who, any other time, I would just be like, I don't really care about dancers, but they brought like such meat to the backstory, there's this thing about athleticism and, and there's a strain of athleticism as leads to competition and so on and so forth. And that's a really, they could have just skipped that, but it's so important,
right,
with an artist who is as competitive as Prince is.
Brother Zach.
So, I'm suffering from the middle of the panel syndrome where it's like I'm just co-signing what people have said. But I think what I can specifically bring out in all of this is this was the essay that felt most like a corrective measure, and I think it was a necessary corrective measure. And Kamilah was definitely alluding to this, and to the we've all these panels we've all talked about. Just the extent to which the narrative work on the Sign of the Times box set was a failure. Musically, that thing smoked, no notes, 10 out of 10 from me. But the narrative work around it was honestly really embarrassing. And a little surprising too, because Andrea Swinson wrote Got to Be Something Here, which was incredible. Like I am far from accusing her of whitewashing anything. I think it just came out that way. I think sometimes I feel like we get this revolution centric narrative because the revolution pick up their phone. It's like you want to talk to somebody who's been with Prince, so you call Dr. Fink, and Dr. Fink's gonna say what Dr. Fink always says. And so I feel like there's a little bit, I'm sympathetic, I guess, is the narrative here shouldn't be, it was intentional whitewashing, but whether it was intentional or not, that's what happened. And I think that they clearly were taking notes, and they clearly deliberately did not do that. And what I think is interesting is that one of the ways that they did that was by honestly having the same MO they had from the previous box sets, which is talk to the band. But in this case, the band, it's a counter narrative. It's not the same thing that we've heard for 40 years. And I just kept going back to what I think is, and again, my purpose here is not to, pick a fight with the revolution, but I just keep thinking about that quote that gets repeated over and over again. I can't remember who said it. It was either Fink or Bobby Z, possibly both at different times. But that idea that the revolution was Prince's only band. Everybody else were hired hands. He was in charge. They had this really unique experience of coming up with him from nothing and putting something together and being collaborative. And that is such a it's such a pernicious, for something that probably they just said and didn't think about anymore. It's had such a pernicious influence on Prince scholarship, and it becomes this like brainworm that everybody is infected with. And it's like, oh, well, the revolution they were a real band. They were scrappy underdogs, they were a gang. And when you look at it, it's like he knew half of the MPG before he ever met the revolution. And he hired the revolution through a newspaper ad, like any other backing. If the MPG are a backing band, then I'm sorry, so are the revolution. And so I think one of the things that was really valuable in this was showing us where some of those blind spots were, and where some of those assumptions and preconceptions were operating. The fact, honestly, I found it so revealing. I never thought of Rosie Gaines as a creative force to the extent that after listening to the podcast and reading the essay, she was, and I think it asks a lot of interesting questions about who can be considered a creative force. I mean, we all accept very easily that Wendy and Lisa and Andre Simone and Sheila E. Were musical equals in a way. But why is it so difficult to accept the same thing about Rosie Gaines? And that's something that I'm definitely, in a way, I'm glad that I have not been writing very actively, because this is something that I feel a responsibility to grapple with in my own work. And I hope that a lot of other writers out there take this as a mandate to do their homework and not just go back to the tried and true narrative, that we've been hearing since the 80s.
Thank you so much. And I think that your statement really combines well with what you said earlier, which is about the lazy writing of the rock critics who basically always run back to Purple Rain because that is the album that is seen to be loved more by the white mass in general. And then everything else, kind of like Hendrix's Band of Gypsies, gets kind of minimalized or marginalized, when we can argue that the music with the Band of Gypsies is probably even far more sophisticated than what he did with the experience. So I appreciate you making that connection. And so, Brother Pride, I'll let you finish us out on that particular question.
And I am grateful that I'm last. You might have to cut me off. First of all, because I've never spoken about Andrea publicly. I'm a bit uncomfortable in speaking about Prince publicly, but that is what it is. But I'm really, really appreciative of all of Andrea's work, and I want to be very, very specific and give kudos to the Diamonds and Pearls podcast. That podcast, I mean, there were so many moments in listening to that entire series where I just was on the cusp of bursting into tears. Like, it was so profound, and that podcast is truly one for the archive. So kudos to her and everyone involved in making that happen. As it relates to the question, Liegh, around Minneapolis and what it is that Prince was attempting to reify in the public imagination. All right, so my friend, a really close friend of mine, Malaya Raya, she did a presentation several years ago, a brilliant presentation several years ago. I'm grateful to be a close friend of hers, and she and I were having a conversation once about this particular band, and she mentioned vaudeville. And when she said vaudeville, and how this was a Black vaudevillian moment, the hairs on my body just raised, and it completely reframed how I saw this band, and kind of taking a piece from what Zach just mentioned around the revolution, kind of drawing a line in the sand between themselves and other bands. As far as the piece that I was going to highlight was a comment from Brown Mark that the revolution were a band, the NPG was a concept. The revolution was also a concept, but I'm not centering them in this conversation. I think what ended up happening with the new power generation, and specifically this album, is Prince. There's a beginning of the new power generation as a bit of an academy, right? Where there aren't faces and voices that are necessarily synonymous with the brand, but it is one that musicians and at times underdeveloped local musicians can come and be a part of, to use that as a pivot for their own careers, right? So, and I think what Prince was doing with the NPG, especially considering that this is made up of, the Game Boys. These are three people that had very keen awareness of Prince as a teenager, right? Were in community with Prince as a teenager. Prince's childhood mentor is in the band. Michael Bland, it's from Minneapolis. From a headcount perspective, there are more members from Minneapolis than any band before it, right? And then even when you want to get to the supplemental members, the Steels, the Hornheads, Minneapolis, right? So what he was essentially doing is, or what I think that he was essentially doing is almost revisiting or rebooting a concept that he saw at the Way growing up, right? And seeing how, at any point, and we see some of that in the Glam Slam 92 show, at any point, one or two or several members of the band could leave the stage and the sound is a bit different, right? Or it could expand, there was so much going on, and there were certain members that were being utilized at a particular time that may not be necessary for the entirety of the show. This is Prince, again, going back to the vaudeville piece, 7 to 10 band members, right? And having multiple disciplines operating at one time to kind of capture a moment that, Prince envisions, and with having this material that he wants to introduce to his hometown. I think what Prince is arguably asking, or what he's declaring, is that not only is this a new decade, but we're bringing it to Minneapolis, right? It's very, I think it's clear in conversation that, fairly early on in Prince's musical career, he had a pretty wide cachet of musicians at his disposal, even before Purple Rain, right? People wanted to work with Prince, and particularly under his band leadership. But what do we see him consistently do, right? Versus tapping into pockets of LA and New York, or even international pockets, what he's doing is going to Minneapolis, right? And giving those folks the opportunity to use their platform that they're getting from him to jumpstart their careers in a way that likely would not happen without Prince, right? Prince does not have to do this in 91. But we see him do that, and we see him do that with this band. So I'm really appreciative of all those elements kind of coming together and it being really clear and depicted with the kind of dignity that the Glam Slam 92 show gives. One other piece that I think is also kind of a bit lost, and my apologies if this is a more appropriate point to bring up in a later essay, but so much of the narratives around, or the more truncated narratives around Diamonds and Pearls kind of start with the bookend of Graffiti Bridge and coming out of Graffiti Bridge, right? And that failure, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, when we think of the launch of Diamonds and Pearls and what leads it, we don't get the Diamonds and Pearls we know without Prince's underground popularity being what it is, right? Mm-hmm. Get Off doesn't become Get Off, which was, you know, very clearly designated as an underground moment, right? We don't get that without Prince's underground popularity and his respect from DJs wholly outside of Graffiti Bridge. So Prince set the stage for his own renaissance. So I get the, okay, Diamonds and Pearls had to be successful and he needed to execute a number of resources to make it do what it needed to do. And it did that, but Get Off is Prince being Prince, right? This is not Prince, the pop hit craftsman. This is Prince being Prince and it working, pre-social media.
So you actually set me up for the next question, for the next essay. So we're going to now go to Jason Draper's essay. Prince worked his ass off to make this happen, and it's happening. What could be better? And so the point I want to pull from Draper's essay is this. Do Black DJs, local and national, get enough credit for supporting Prince and helping to make sure that he didn't become irrelevant? Provide a couple of examples to support your position. And we'll start again with Professor Cummings and go around the bend. So Professor Cummings, talk to us about whether or not the Black DJs get enough credit for Diamonds and Pearls success and all the Prince's success.
Nobody Black gets enough credit in Prince world, but we're working to change it. Thank you, D'Angela. So I think one of the things about Draper's essay, and I'll definitely answer your question, but one of the things that stood out to me was even including Donnie Simpson. Let's keep it 100. Prior to D'Angela having us come together in this beautiful Prince Fellowship, you rarely heard BET or Donnie Simpson included in the Prince narrative. It was always about, oh, MTV didn't play him until 1999. And it was like going to what Harold said about the underground and Black people. We didn't need MTV because BET was showing Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad, to go to David Z's erroneous comment about Black people not liking Prince because he wasn't the Temptations. I was watching Why You Want to Treat Me So Bad and that beautiful guitar outro on BET, you know, Black radio. And some of this is geographical because, you know, being a Black Midwesterner, we supported Prince from day one. And Pepe Willie's book, when he talks about that first tour and trying to do promotion, the first PR tour, littering the South Side of Chicago with promotion and the DJs he was hearing in the chocolate cities or the Black market. So I don't think Black radio DJs, Black media, Black audiences, fans, no one Black or the Black musicians, which I'm grateful to this project for starting that shift, get enough credit for Prince. I mean, at the end of the day, Prince is the illustration of a successful Black business. You know, it's like he started with that food truck and built on up to the restaurants, and we're showing up for our greens and cornbread. So, and we were there, you know, from the beginning to the end. And so when we talk about the underground and DJs in particular, I want to go back to Graffiti Bridge, because all of this talk about, oh, he needed a hit and he had fallen off. It, you know, it is another space where Blackness is erased. You know, in 1990, Thieves from the Temple was #1 on the Black charts. BET was showing the long version of the video. The precursor to the Get Off maxi single is that New Power Generation maxi single with Lubricated Lady and Love to the Left. And we're seeing Get Off, you know, a peek into a preview of Get Off in those remixes. And then Thieves in the Temple, he's got the house dub of Thieves in the Temple. So he's already building this space with the black as the dance music in my house course, I talk about the 90s and where house, the disco goes to house, and then in the 90s for the mainstream it becomes dance and it's a little bit more sanitized. But Prince was going and getting a Steve Silk Hurley from Chicago to remix. Frankie Knuckles is doing stuff for Paisley Park, so he's working with like the real DJs. And so when you say DJ to somebody from Chicago, you know we're going to house. But we were playing his music. You know, there are parties here all the time where like bona fide DJs like Dwayne Powell are doing Prince sets because Prince is so well respected. You know, the Chosen Few, our big house picnic that they call the Black Lollapalooza every year, they inducted him into the Hall of Fame, the House Music Hall of Fame, and Cat was there to accept the award. So he always kept his hand and foot in the Black community, the Black underground, what was going on around him. So it's a lot of times people who are outside of that who were so surprised by Black Prince. Like my sister says, you know, a lot of mainstream or white audiences only want so much Black in their Prince mix. It's like you put a little bit too much sugar in there, go down a teaspoon. So it's that kind of deal. Don't mess up the recipe. But for us, we knew what the recipe was, and it was always evolving because that was Prince. Sometimes we were going to get cinnamon, sometimes we were going to get nutmeg. That's just what Prince did. And so no, they don't get enough credit. None of us do. But I love that the course correction from the Sign of the Times box set is that people are listening and they're open, and D'Angela is providing this amazing free resource for people who are scholars to come do their research off of the work of the brilliant people she has here. So that was a long way of answering your question, but I got it in there.
Look here, but it was right on point as always. Brother Woods, step on up and talk to us about these Black DJs and Prince.
Yes, sir. So the short answer is no, they do not get enough credit, period. But since we're here, I want to take a moment to apply just some basic math, because my goal in a lot of these kind of discussions is to remove certain questions. And we remove those questions forever if we kind of change perspective. And so one of the things I want to mention is that we talk about Black DJs and Black radio, especially at that time period where it was still a little bit free, meaning they could play what they want a little bit, right? As long as they got this in, they could do this, right? It's not like that now, obviously. But this notion that there's this underground, and when we talk about underground, what we really mean is just, when it comes to Prince, what we mean is anything that's not mainstream, right? If it's not hitting this chart, then it's underground, right? And we know that mathematically that is ridiculous. That's a ridiculous idea, right? That if you don't listen to, or if you don't rank in this 100 songs list, or these 50 top albums, or this 20 album chart, then you're underground, or your success is not mainstream. And when we consider just the sheer volume of music that comes out in any given year, back then still, but obviously more now, but even back then, like hundreds and hundreds of records across genres, right? And we're like, oh, Prince didn't get a top 10 hit, or what, you know, on that chart. So where his support is now underground, if it exists at all. Like, these are ridiculous notions, right? Black people have never given up Prince, right? We may not have given him mainstream support behind certain projects, but we never just flat out gave up Prince. Right. Which is why I want to bring up one more thing. To me, it's important to point out that there are two Princes. There's always some slice of number of Princes, but in this point, I want to mention that there are two Princes. There's the Prince on records, and there is live Prince, right? And so Prince on record, Black people, you gotta, like, you know, we might pass a record up, we may skip a record here, there, that kind of thing. But when Prince came to town, Black folks kept Prince and that whole band fed. Let's be clear about this, right? And I'm saying that as somebody whose town he would skip all the time, right? He would be like, Columbus, what? So, if you go to Detroit, if you go to DC, if you go to Atlanta, like who's in those audiences, right? In these supposedly fallow periods. And so I'm not saying that Diamonds and Pearls isn't a comeback record. I'm saying comeback don't always mean what we think it means.
Mm-hmm.
When I refer to this being a comeback record for Prince, I'm mostly speaking about his ego. I'm mostly speaking about his contractual obligation.
Okay.
I'm not speaking about his talent, because all you got to do is look at that second Prince, the live Prince. The live Prince will make you believe in songs you don't believe in, whole albums you don't believe in. And this album is explicitly one of those examples. I do not like Thunder, but when he plays it live, I'm like, all right.
Thank you so much. Brother Zach.
This is one that I have to, I mean, the answer is, like Scott said, the answer is no. Black DJs don't get enough credit. I think I have to also give credit to Kamilah, because just this is her work in all of these symposia, almost all of these symposia. Kamilah has been doing the work of, fact checking this claim that Prince lost the Black audience. And it has been really impactful, for me in addressing misinformation that's in the official narrative, and that I probably wouldn't have caught. I was born in '84. During this period, I would honestly, during Prince's entire career, I was not thinking about how the music got to me. I think that honestly, I would go so far as to say that when we think about pop music, we don't think very much about the technological and industrial apparatus that gets it in our ears. And I think that is thinking about this is a reason why that you can see why that's a shortcoming of our understanding, because it isn't all just genius, right? It isn't all just he created the art, and because it was so great, it got where it needed to be. There's a lot of work that goes into this, and that's why this Draper essay, I thought some of the most interesting. I always think it's interesting to hear from Warner Brothers. I know that sounds weird, but I think it's interesting, especially because we know what's going to happen between Prince and Warner Brothers in just like a year from this time. It's really interesting to hear kind of like how the sausage is being made, and it is revealing of what's going to happen next. This whole, I think it's easy, especially for somebody who kind of became more aware later. It's easy to look back at the slave thing and be like, where did that come from? But if you read this essay, all of the seeds are very well planted. They're not only planted, they're about to bloom. Like the shit's going to hit the fan very soon. And I think that this is a good reminder to, I do not consider myself a younger critic. I'm pushing 40, but it's a reminder to the actual younger critics. So much of the like discourse around pop music on social media, which thankfully I'm not really on anymore, but so much of it is very like ignoring the kind of material conditions that created, like why, okay, you're a huge Michael Jackson fan. There's a lot of things that went into making Michael Jackson this global superstar. And it's not just that he was that, amazing, right? Like it's this sort of like great man theory that gets applied to pop music. And so I think this is a reminder that, knowing a little something about the apparatus that puts the music out there, that's sort of the key to understanding a lot of this stuff, to understanding like what was going on with Prince and the black radio infrastructure, what was going on with Prince and Top 40. Like why do we say that Diamonds and Pearls is a comeback album? I think in some ways it is, because like Scott says, I think it hurt Prince when he was not in the top 10, but that's not a failing. He had unbelievably high standards for himself, and so I think it just helps us kind of, as writers, it helps us ground the narrative in something other than picking which Pokemon you want to back in a fight. Like it's what separates historians from stans, right? So I think that's I think it's a great question, and it's something that we could all do well to think about.
Appreciate you, good brother. Finally, Brother Pride, take us home on this question.
Okay, so to answer the question, no, Black DJs, or just DJs in general, don't get the credit they deserve for ensuring that Prince's music is always available for a kind of awareness from music scholars, or just anyone with a level of curiosity that may not already be in a relationship with the work. I'm big on, as some of my presentations in the past have articulated, I'm really big on viewing Prince through the lens of geography. So I talk about Oakland, I talk about Detroit, I talk about Chicago. All of those spaces it's not accidental that there's a very rich DJ culture associated with all of those spaces. And in the cases of Detroit and Chicago, Prince knew it. And, without me, it's very easy and commonplace to project our own shit onto Prince and turn it into a business plan, right? So, but I can, when I listen to how Prince showed up in the Midwest, when I listen to what came out of him in Chicago, when I listen to what came out of him in Detroit, there's a uniqueness to it that I can't pinpoint, at least in the US, that shows up in other spaces, right? And that DJ culture, it's also there. I also already talked about Get Off and how we got into Get Off and how important DJ culture was to Diamonds and Pearls. But relative to the importance of DJs throughout his entire career, one of the biggest examples that I like to highlight is Housequake. And listening to the reaction to Housequake on the Love Sexy tour, very specifically, obvious bias aside, listening to the reaction to Housequake, which was not an A-side single, but understanding how huge a moment it was in his live canon, and how enthusiastic audiences were. That enthusiasm is driven by local DJs, right? I grew up in North Carolina, and I didn't have a Chicago Nation fan club. I didn't have Love Sexy DC. I didn't have Bump Squad in LA. I didn't have New Power New York. Shout out to Zahir Ali. But I did have the radio. And on the radio, I heard When Two Are in Love. I heard Positivity. I heard Strange Relationships. So I say all of that to say, DJs are so critical to Prince being sustained as a Black genius in ways that folks who may have had wanting interests. It's really interesting to me how reductive a lot of critics can be over periods where they lost interest because they're having to kind of retroactively revisit something. And it's just like, well, for the folks who were a part of it and for the folks who continue to support Prince during these off-peak eras, nothing changed. So to that regard, no, it isn't a comeback. Where were you? So that's kind of a long way to answer that question. But, hopefully through events like this and conversations like this, we'll begin to understand that DJs were just as important as I consider DJs as musicians. Someone like Brother Jules, rest in peace, was huge to relative to the local space in Minneapolis. He was a huge deal. And, being able to give a level of credibility to these people in Prince's official narrative is really important.
All right, so we have 20 minutes and 3 essays still left to cover. So we just want to keep that in mind. And so I'm going to jump to Sister Kamilah Williams' essay titled, Did You Ever Wonder? And as I'm struggling with all these essays, which one of the questions I want to answer, I want you guys to focus on this, is that in what ways, using Williams's reference to how the beginning notes of Cream, quote, confused her ears, in what ways does Diamond and Pearls confuse or challenge the ears of listeners either in 1991 or today? And I want to begin with Brother Zach, and then we'll come around the horn. And so we're just thinking about in how for Sister Williams, the opening notes of the song confused her ears. How do you see Diamonds and Pearls doing that in 91 or today? You can take either way. Go ahead, Brother Zach.
Well, I'll try to keep it brief. I think as I revisited Diamonds and Pearls, it really struck me how, again, as somebody who Diamonds and Pearls is not in my top 10 favorite Prince albums. It still isn't now, even after the box set. But as someone who has never held it in a lot of esteem, it struck me how it's much more sophisticated than I think a lot of people give it credit for. There's a lot more going on here. I think there's another one of your other questions that we didn't get to see, Liegh, was something about it being considered, it's often kind of dismissed as a pop album, right? And I mean, that's a kind of a meaningless phrase anyway. Pop, like, what is the definition of pop? But I mean, there is pop going on here. There's also, straight up funk. Kamilah mentions there's even a little bit of a country feel to the beginning of Cream. And I think Prince would kind of, he play that up a little bit sometimes. Cream is a full-throated rewrite of Get It On, Bang a Gong by T-Rex. So we got glam rock in the mix, which is one of the reasons why I love it so much. So I mean, even these, like, the albums that we treat as like, oh, it's just Prince, trying to get a hit. It's commercial Prince or whatever. There's so much more going on than just by virtue of the unique cocktail that was his style. And so when you think about the fact that this is considered kind of one of his less, in the fan community or whatever, this is considered kind of one of his less interesting albums. And there's still such a blend of different sounds and influences. And, the essays talk about there's hip hop, but there's also, sometimes it sounds like a 60s soul review. There's so much going on here. It's really just the whole continuum of Black popular music, but not even just Black popular music, just popular music from the last 50 years is going on in this album. And this is considered like basic Prince, so I think it's another one of those things where it's like, it's so easy to take for granted because he did it so much and he did it so well. But I don't know if there was a basic Prince, right?
Very good. Thank you so much, sir. Brother Woods, talk to us about how you see Diamonds and Pearls confusing, challenging music either in 91 or today.
Well, I will tell you from personal experience that I was a little confused. So when Get Off came out, I was like, oh my God, Prince is back, right? Like, he did it, And then Cream dropped, and I was like, what happened, right? It was so different. And now in reflection, we can all just kind of go back and say, well, Prince is so many things and he could do everything. And we've been saying that for years. And this is just an example. And these are the 2 singles that dropped before the album came out. And then the album just showed everything between these 2 extremes, right? And but at the time, I was just like, yo, what is happening, right? So it was confusing even then to me and to a lot of people, right? And I think that the good news is that confusion is irrelevant now, right? So like you can just hear the whole record. Once the record came out, the confusion was, I think, pretty much alleviated if you listen to the whole record. There may be other things you don't like, but I don't care, right? Like those are taste arguments. I don't get into taste arguments. Mm-hmm. We're talking about what is this man capable of, and did he succeed at those things? That is the measure. And the answer is yes, he did succeed at those things. So I, and with Kamilah on this, I too was confused. I don't think that confusion would be present now. Black music is, while it has always been sophisticated and while it has always been broad in range and depth, that has not always been apparent publicly in the mainstream. And today that is, right? Black people are doing everything. We have always done everything, but now that we do everything. And so I think people for whom this is the first time that they're receiving this record, it will definitely go down a lot smoother than it did back then.
Very good. Brother Fry.
Celie, I don't know if you saw the chat, but D'Angela said we can go over. So I'm taking her up on that. But jokes aside, I am going to expand some of my answer a little bit. I want to talk relative to a 91 year, and what that and how a project like Diamonds and Pearls could conceivably challenge a 91 year. I want to take the opportunity to talk about the studio to stage pipeline and how that changed with this band. Okay, and also to think about the importance of trio and quintet work for Prince, regardless of how large his band is at the time, right? So in 91, we don't hear a lot of live or acoustic drumming in soul music. We just don't, it's just not a part of the radio. I was immersed in all things, MTV, VH1, BET, The Box, I Got You. I'm all over the place. And you just didn't hear a lot of live drumming in soul music at the time. So this is an opportunity to talk about Michael Bland, who, before him, the primary drummer in the 80s for Prince's albums was Prince. Okay, y'all know I show up for Escovedo Down, but the primary drummer from 78 onward for that full decade was Prince. And his relationship with Michael Bland, his immediate relationship with Michael Bland, and how rich and fertile that was, and how so often we hear stories of we just take this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and it ends up being on the radio a year later. That wasn't happening before Michael Bland, right, from Minneapolis, a teenager. That wasn't happening, and we see that as a part of a continuum of the importance of trio work with Prince. Trio or quintet work with Prince. We saw it with Sheila Levi, Eric Leeds. We see it with Michael Bland, Sonny Thompson. We see it with John Blackwell, Rhonda Smith. Black is the New Black, right? We didn't get to see that, but it falls under that category. And so much of those moments really provided Prince an opportunity to reboot and determine what his next band will look like, right? So when we think about The Undertaker being recorded between Act 1 and Act 2, and then a year, maybe not even a year later, the band is a lot smaller, and it's certainly far more guitar driven. That's just as important as this moment on the box set is that the nucleus of so many of these compositions really truly do come from Michael Bland and Prince, or Michael Bland and Prince and Levi, or Michael Bland, you know what I'm saying? But anchored by Michael Bland, right? And Michael Bland arguably is one of the people who decentered the importance of drum programming in Prince's work in the 90s. He's instrumental to that, right? Because Prince put his live performances on his albums and they became singles. So when you talk about challenging a 91 ear, Diamonds and Pearls as a single, as a hit single, is a challenge to whatever that standard was. So I say all that to say, I think this piece is super important as far as the trio and quartet work. I think it was also a bit of a comfort zone for him because it replicated what he had with Morris and Andre. And I'll stop right there.
All right, very thanks. So Professor Cummings, please close us out on this question.
Okay, can everyone hear me? I had an issue with my mic. Okay, perfect. And praise Shango, Yahweh, and D'Angelo for the extra time because I'm going to need it, but I won't take it all because there are two things I want to say to this. First, really quickly, not to toot my own horn, but I loved this album and the diversity of it in 91. I hated 90s music for the most part. It's like I just wanted to I was 16 when this album came out. I wanted to be 16 in like 1973 because the music of the 90s, I hated it. I looked over the top 100 songs of 91 and I was like, this is the genius and creativity of Prince. His songs sounded nothing like the other stuff that was on those charts in lyrical content and musical diversity and complexity. Like Harold said about the live drums, owing to Michael B being just a phenomenal young drummer and such a quick learner from his after school sessions that he talked about with Prince. And so it's just so important for me just to represent maybe the people who just love this album when it came out as it was. I mean, Walk Don't Walk was my song. That was my theme song as I walked through the halls of my high school. And so, but Prince was always just his own category for me. I didn't put him in other musical categories. And with the MPG, what we see with Prince, like maybe we hadn't seen with another Black artist, maybe I think of Roy Ayers and Ubiquity, but the band name and these changing members that are coming in and out, but they're serving the vision of their leader. You had that with Todd Rundgren in Utopia or Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. But here we're seeing a Black artist do this in a way that we hadn't seen before. And to that comparison to David Bowie earlier, because I love David Bowie. I was listening to Breaking Glass the other day. But the point of it is that no, David, as much as I love him, he was nowhere near the stratosphere of Prince. But it comes to this question about confusing the ear and what is Black music? Because when you think about a David Bowie album like Low or even Heroes, and the core of those bands, who is it? It's George Murray, a brother on bass, Dennis Davis, a brother on drums, Carlos Alomar, Puerto Rican, we claim him as a brother on guitar because he's in that space with the genre of music that Carlos Alomar was playing. And so it becomes, what is Black music? So in the essay where the labels, the executives are arguing that, oh, he's R&B and no, he's pop. And it's like, no, he's Prince. And what qualifies something as R&B or Black? So often greatness, people try to extricate that from something Black. How could those lowly Black folks produce this? And so that's why it's important that with Andrea Swinson's work with the essay and the podcast, this grounding Prince in Blackness, having his musical contemporaries and mentor start naming these influences that represent the buffet of Black music. It's Herbie Hancock, it's Quincy Jones, it's Archie Bell and the Drells, it's all these different Black influences. Like Sonny T said, they were kind of fed off the same spoon musically. And so people who got that got Prince. My parents were born in 37 and 36. I think about Prince's mother being born in 34 and the musical influences I heard. I remember my mother would listen to country because she said, hey, where we were, that's the only station we got. There was no Black station. So we were listening to country and that blues, the kind of symbiosis there for Black people. So we heard it in Cream and, all the other different sounds we were hearing throughout Diamonds and Pearls. So it comes back to this myopia around Black music, this reductiveness from white writers who don't understand or don't want to understand, or at least acknowledge the complexity and variety of Black music. And so that's, for me, what I love, that Prince was always challenging that and trying to get listeners and critics alike to understand that there is no boundary to music. And I'm showing you that.
Thank you.
I did, Celia, I apologize, and I'll be brief. There was a point that I wanted to raise a little earlier around Prince's bands and the new power generation being a concept. Kamilah knows as is she, I am obsessed with all things Parliament Funkadelic. And so much around that band could be, so much around Prince's bands can be kind of understood if we kind of view it through the lens of P-Funk. And I've read, I try to read every book you better do it. That is like when I tell you, like everybody in my phone got a text about that book, including Kamilah. But the reason I wanted to bring that up is that it's not a point that George Clinton makes often, and I forget I know which book of mine it's in, but I don't recall which interview, but he said something that was really, really keen, and I think it could be applied to the new power generation. He said in a book about P-Funk that he wanted to create a band that was not at risk or susceptible to the departure of any one person. Right. So, which is why at times you could see Michael Hampton playing at the same time Eddie Hazel whenever he was out of jail, at the same time Gary Scheider. You have 3 guitar players playing, right? You don't necessarily need 3 guitar players, but they're in the band. If you think of that concept as far as not having any one member devalue the brand or diminish what it is that, or the power of the moment, the live moment, you can really apply that to the new power generation. So it wasn't so much a matter of, I only want to see Michael Bland. It's what flavor will the new drummer give this, right? Because, pre-revolution or post-revolution, things were always going to change. It cracks me up whenever I hear people talk as if they were going to stay with Prince forever. Prince who? Because Prince Rogers Nelson, you weren't going to stay with him forever. Not in his band. So I say all that to say, I think some of what George articulated in that moment can be applied to the new power generation, in that, like, he didn't want to create something that, the public would associate with any 1 or 2 people.
And look here, I'm glad you interjected with that, because we needed to hear that. We have 2 essays. And we're going to get through these 2 essays. The way I'm going to get through this next essay, the next essay is, of course, D'Angelo Duff's Everything You'll Look For, You'll Find. And what I'm going to do is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I think I don't want to run through this, so we're probably going to have to go up until like maybe 3:50, if that's okay with you guys.
Okay.
Is that good? All right.
That's cool. 3:50 your time, 2:50 mine, because I'm in the central. I'm down here in the South of Mississippi, represent.
Sorry, folks. I just want to say really quickly, sorry, people. Thank you for staying around. Writers are supposed to write, but we talk a lot before we write. So please forgive us for going over. And thank you for sharing your Saturday.
So we call it Writers and Talkers panel. All right. So what I'm going to do with Professor Duff's essay is, I'm going to ask 3 questions, and you get to choose which of those 3 questions you want to answer. And so here are the 3 questions I had planned for Professor Duff. As Professor Duff discusses Prince creating, quote, an alternative purple universe, end quote, explain how Diamonds and Pearls does that and how it expands or reshapes the universe he had built to that point. That's the first question. The second one is, which song from Diamond and Pearls resonates with you most or more today than it did in the past? And the third question is, this is actually combining Professor Duff's essay with Sister Williams' essay. That is, which messages from Diamonds and Pearls resonate with you the most and why? And so you can answer any one of those three questions. I'll start with Brother Zach. Brother Zach, it's on you.
Okay. I'm going to take the one, which song resonates more with me today, because I feel like I have to say something on these panels that'll get me in trouble. And so this is going to be the one. So I've said a couple times, I've never been somebody who identified Diamonds and Pearls as a favorite album, but I've been like really enjoying it. And it struck me when I was listening to it, just how joyful. I mean, that's something that Andrea Swinson talks about in her essay. It's such a joyful, fun album, and it's just like a pleasure to listen to. And one thing that I've noticed is, like I said before, I'm 39. When I was first getting into Prince, I was in I obviously I heard about him. I heard of him before, but when I was like seriously getting into Prince, I was in college. So like late teens, early 20s. And I've always been somebody like, Kamilah was saying that you wished you were a teenager in the 70s. That resonated with me so much. I've always listened to older music. But the thing is, the older music that would appeal to me was made by younger people. It was made by people who were my age, but they were in the 60s or the 70s. And so, I think a lot about the challenges I've had with 90s Prince in my life. And I think a lot of that might just be that Prince was at a different place in his life in 1991 than I was when I was getting into his music. I was like, Controversy was up my alley. Dirty Mind was up my alley. Even Purple Rain, there's this like youthful punk energy that's in his early work that was the thing that grabbed me about Prince. And it's taken me a longer time to get into his later stuff. So this is the part that's going to get me in trouble, because I was watching the Glam Slam show the other night, and I was thinking, it was so fun, but also there's kind of a corniness to Prince during this period. There's like a real, and I think it's deliberate, by the way. There's like a real camp element. And Scott mentioned vaudeville earlier. I think it was Scott mentioned vaudeville. Oh no, which one mentioned vaudeville? Who mentioned vaudeville? I don't know.
Harold did. Thank
you, Harold mentioned vaudeville. I'm sorry.
Don't put that on me.
There's like this, let's put on a show kind of it's fun, and fun when you're young feels a little corny. And I was sitting there with my wife watching it, and I was like, I like this era of Prince because he's corny but still horny. And that's kind of that's like, and that like for me cracked the code of Prince in the 90s. Emancipation is like the epitome of a corny but horny album. It is both things at the same time. And I think I couldn't get there. I already see the chat is asking me, corny how? There's something about, I'll try to articulate this. It's like that kind of joy, especially if you're somebody from, like more of who comes from a little more of a rock background. It's not cool to be having fun, right? And that's something that I've embraced. I've embraced the willingness to smile and the willingness to have fun and goof around and, say things where you're not always like with the smoke, curl, the dry ice curling around you, looking like you just stepped out of a poster. It doesn't always have to be Blade Runner, right? Like sometimes you can just be having a good time. And that's sort of that's the vibe. And I think I'm more ready for that as somebody in his 30s and 40s than I was in my 20s. And so like something like, I think about like Daddy Pop such a silly song, but like so joyful and fun and just a blast to listen to. And willing and able, same thing. Like this is such a fun album. And I'm glad that I could reach a point in my life where it connects with me and to an extent that it didn't. Yes, exactly, Blade Brown. Sometimes you gotta. This has such a. It's that gangsta glam. You know, hanging out with the boys, cracking jokes, and also wearing a neon yellow mankini. Like that's the vibe. And I dig it a lot.
Look at, appreciate that. Brother Woods.
Actually, I'm gonna come in. I'm gonna come in for a hot second. Zach knows that I love him, so I only say this out of love. That Glam Slam show, the reason why I love it is because it is sheer, pure joy that Prince is exuding. I don't see it as corny. I think it's one of the most beautiful things ever to see Prince happy. Now, several years ago, there was this term called Black Boy Joy. I never liked the boy part of it, but Black man joy, it's nothing like it. And seeing Prince on the top of that bar, dancing his butt off is nothing like it. So for me, it's not corny. I just wanted to say that.
Oh no, right. It's amazing. I totally get what you're saying. It's incredible.
And I think to kind of synergize with both Brother Zach and Professor Duff is saying, I think that, and I don't want us to run long, but because I think what both of them are making these very important points, that when I heard Brother Zach say corny, what he was meaning was that a lot of times happiness is seen as inauthentic in popular culture. Because when you think about most popular culture music or art begins as counterculture music. And so because most popular culture begins as counterculture, and the counterculture is fighting against the oppression of the culture, then the people who are riding with you with the counterculture are asking, why the hell are you so damn happy? If the music's about a revolution and the music is about us fighting against this oppressive mainstream culture, then rock, punk, reggae, ska, blues, all of that was counterculture. Jazz was all counterculture. So I get exactly what Brother Zach is saying. But the reverse of it, which means you don't have to choose between either or, what Sister Professor Duff is adding to the discussion is, and simultaneously, Prince was also embracing that while Black people were involved in this struggle, one of the things that maintained our struggle was our spiritual belief in a better world that manifested itself in a happiness that could only be found at the Black church. So when you see Prince and Sacrifice of Victor manifesting their joy and Jughead manifesting their joy, it is because Black people have always manifested that joy in that counterculture. So I wanted to be clear that both of them are making very valid points, that we don't have to walk away from this saying, I have to choose one over the other. This gets us to our last essay and the last question. So we're going to go with Brother Tudor's essay, and I'm going to scroll back up. And it goes to Brother Tudor's essay, I got grooves and grooves upon the shelf, sessionology, right? And so the point I want to pull from here is, Alan Lees stated that Prince treated his songs like the news because they were a reflection of current times that he wanted to express to his listeners in real time. How does knowing that Thunder and Live for Love were direct responses to the warfare in the Middle East impact how you view Prince as a social political artist? And so I'll begin, we'll go Sister Cummings, and then we'll go up and we'll end with Brother Zach. So Sister Cummings.
Thank you, Celine, for reminding me that I forgot my church fan after your sermon there. I have to come back to D'Angelo. Sorry for going off script, but I got to speak on my sister. I just wanted to say this idea of the purple universe, and I love how the quotes and the lyrics, I'm sorry, and the songs she pulled to support her point of Prince representing freedom incarnate. And then she said something about the reaction that people had to the MTV performance. And she said, oh, it was simply another day in Prince world. So to come to the sessionography and what Alan Liegh said about the politics and Prince seeing his work as being a reflection of the news, what D'Angelo captures so beautifully in her piece is this idea of Prince gave us so much that we're still learning from. We're enjoying his music and examining it. But as she said, you know, there was a treasure box of discovery in Diamonds and Pearls, but really his whole catalog. And so when she ends with this idea of reaching potential, are we doing it? You know, Prince surpassed even our imagination's wildest dream of potential. And so we see, as Levi said in one of the quotes, that his well was endless, it was bottomless. Yet again, he's still so grounded in the world. It's something that's so missing. When I looked at those 1991 charts, everything was about some version of romantic love. But when you look at Diamonds and Pearls, there's so much self-agency, going back to Kanissa's essay, self-advocacy, self-motivation. Like, it's a peek into how this man thinks when he's talking about push and strolling, it's so great to be alive. Like, money don't matter, live for love, how he altered those words to talk about what was going on. When I look at music today, I'm like, man, we've lived through like a pandemic, there are wars around, there's all this stuff going on, and everybody's talking about they've got Chanel around their neck or whatever pill they're popping. And it's just kind of like, where is this? It's missing from music. So this peek into his universe, his mind that he always gave us with his lyrics reflect a socio-political artist. So I'm always incensed when people are shocked when we talk about Prince as a socio-political artist. But again, it speaks to the diminishing of the Black intellect and Black artists as socio-political voices. So to tie those two together and shut myself up, I love that we get these windows into how Prince thinks cream. People think it's just about sex or whatever. It's a self-motivation song. You know, all of these songs, if you think about them, they're very motivational and willing and able, a peek into where he's going next. And there is a joy there that's about what's about to come on the other side. He knows he's about to fight for his life to really realize freedom in a way beyond what we even thought. We thought he was free, but he wasn't. He was getting ready to do battle for that next thing. So that's why I love someone pointing out that he was socio-political and us understanding his process and his mind with how he was navigating his art and life at the same time.
Thank you so much. Brother Pride, talk to us about how not learning that information enhances your thought of Prince as a social political artist. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I've been listening to Beyonce clearly. Everybody on mute. Sorry. So here we go. I'll start with Thunder. So relative to that song, and it's usually the first song that I parse when Diamonds and Pearls is kind of reduced to just being a kind of tried and true knee-jerk craft. But to my ears, with minimal changes or no changes at all, the production of Thunder could have fit on anything from Love Sexy Batman and Graffiti Bridge. There isn't any other song on Diamonds and Pearls that sounds quite like that, right? It is a song that is tried and true Prince, the mad scientist Prince, at play. So having the anecdote of its relevance to the war going on at that particular time, that's great, but it also makes the moment even more timeless because it could have fit on at least 3 projects from the prior decade. So I wanted to point that out. Another thing that I wanted to do, and I have to go off script a little bit because I'd be beating myself up. If we're winding down, I'd be beating myself up if I did this and I did not talk about Rosie Gaines. We haven't talked about her a lot, and Rosie has so much significance, and we probably won't see another reissue or special edition that centers her and her contributions, her vast contributions to prints like this one. So I wanted to give her flowers. D'Angela is really considerate at spacing these conversations to be at least a month or so after the release, but I am still overwhelmed by, and as I always have been with Rosie, and I'm really, really happy to see that she's been getting all of the above ground attention that she's been getting lately for her contributions to this time. I'll also end with a really quick anecdote. So between 2000 and 2002, Rosie had a website, Dreadlinks. And this is years before, I don't know if you guys remember CD Baby. CD Baby was essentially a website that a lot of indie artists would sell their merch without having to independently, have their own website, et cetera, et cetera. When you placed an order on Rosie's website, she'd respond to you. So, and around this time, I'm 19, 20, and the first time she responded, it was very clear that it wasn't an auto reply. First time she responded, I didn't respond. I was just like, oh, wow, that's super nice. I'm big on acts of kindness that are without agenda and spectacle. And the fact that she responded to a 20-year-old fan at the time was great. So a year later or so, I ordered again. And a year later, I ordered again and she responded. This time, I started asking questions and she was gracious enough to answer a few of my Prince questions. So that kindness is just a small example of why I love to see this kind of treatment for her career and her contributions to Prince. She didn't have to do that. And if she did that with me, I know she did that with other people.
Thank you so much. Let's see. Are we at, who's gone? I'm sorry. I'm looking at the clock. I know since the comments, Brother Woods. I'm sorry, Brother Woods and then Brother Zach.
So, for the record, I wanted to answer, in the previous thing, I wanted to answer that space question. I'm going to take that to Twitter. So, to stay on book, I'm going to speak to the question at hand, which is about Prince as a social political artist and how this album kind of feeds or doesn't feed into that. Clearly it does. Clearly this is not new. This is only new for people for whom this album is new. If this is like your first entry into Prince, then you'll be like, oh, I didn't know Prince was so political, right? But Prince is political from his second album on. And he's either political directly with his art, like on record, or he is political in effect. So he creates art that challenges politics, as in censorship, as in the PMRC. Bambi is political. Controversy is a political record. 1999 is political, right? So as far as what this album contributes to that, it's just a more blatant example of that, right? It's like, here is war. War is bad. We are in war. War is bad. And so to me, this does, like, if you have been following Prince at all up to that point, you already were kind of hip to this. This was not a surprise to you at all. And if you were not aware of this and you discovered this now, welcome to the party.
There you go. Brother Zach, finish us out.
All right. I think this is I totally agree with what Scott just said. I also think, though, that Prince doesn't get enough credit still about his social political, I guess, the consistency to which politics were relevant to his music. I think there's a certain posture that we expect when we think about quote unquote political music. We expect it to be like The Clash, or we expect it to be like Public Enemy, where it's like, we're sort of reading a Marxist pamphlet, and it's set to music. And Prince didn't really do that. And I think from some perspectives, especially, I see it a lot in European writers. They're like, well, this is kind of milquetoast, watered down. This is just like surface level stuff. But I think with Prince, you have to look at not only the lyrics, but just the whole everything, all. And so I'm thinking about, like, when I listen to Thunder, I'm not thinking, wow, that's a hard-hitted response to the Gulf War necessarily, but when I look at the whole package, I mean, I'm thinking about the Glam Slam Blu-ray again, where the cops show up at the end, there's, and that's a part of, Prince was political just for being the person he was in the place he was, and being the level of free that he was, and so much of that context is, again, I think it's easy to gloss over, but it's there, and it's pretty profound. So yeah, I think that, and this is another, I'm gonna give credit to these events that D'Angelo puts together, because they're starting a lot of these conversations and have, putting these things in the foreground in ways that they often aren't in just mainstream criticism. And I also think there's something to be said about the fact that he was talking about the Gulf War. And not a lot of artists were talking, I think Neil Young did some stuff around the Gulf War, but it wasn't like this. And I mean, again, I was 7 years old, so maybe I'm missing something, but it wasn't like this flashpoint like the second Iraq War was.
Right.
There wasn't as much of a mainstream response in the arts, and it was a little more for somebody like Prince to be saying, even this war against Saddam Hussein, there's still like something about this isn't right. It's pretty different.
Right. And I'll end us on this, so so Professor Duff can come on. We do know, documented, that Thunder was written, like Live for Love, in response to what was happening in the Gulf War. If you say that Thunder is not about related to the Gulf War, it's only because you have no idea, no history or understanding of what liberation theology is. And that is another point about knowing Black culture, and knowing how for Black culture, in the civil rights movement, you could not separate spirituality from social political engaging. So there are a couple of great essays about Black liberation theology. I would suggest, if you're really serious about knowing who Prince is and knowing how he combines spirituality with politics, you were going to do some research on Black liberation theology, because as a matter of fact, from the moment he wrote Anti-Christian through the Rainbow Children, you needed to have an understanding of Black liberation theology to truly understand what Prince was doing from a social political ideology. That is all. I want to thank these brilliant writers. I want Professor Duff to come on and tell y'all we got 8 minutes before we get funky again. We got funky now. We're going to get funky again. And in the words of laying healing hands on Brother Dean, Funkalooza, Brother Dean, Funkalooza, you was healed and able to make it with us today. Come out.
All right. So I'm actually not going to say anything, because we got to get to the next room, or at least I got to get to the next room. Thank you so much to each and every one of you. It was an incredible conversation, like I know it would be. And I will see everybody in the next room. And this is actually, I need to bring Arthur on stage, because this is actually what he's waiting for, which is the next Power Generation panel. So we're going to go and make that happen, because they might be hanging out going like, what's going on? Nobody's here. So I got to go to the other room. Thanks to everyone for being here today, and for all the panelists. I love all of you, each and every one of you. I'm sorry I can't give you like the individual love I've done on the previous panels, but I think I did that before we got on. So you guys know. All right. We're going to hop to the next room with the quickness.